All right, welcome back into the podcast. Excited to have this person on. She has been a huge addition to the Bears beat the last couple years. She's really made her mark, one of the best out there. She is Courtney Cronin from ESPN, of course, at Courtney R. Cronin on Twitter/X. And she joins me now. Courtney, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. It's been a busy off season so far. I don't think things are going to slow down, even though this is supposed to be like the dead time. But always good to talk some NFL while the season's still going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So since the season is going on, let's talk a little bit about that, especially being one of the teams of the Final Four was in the NFC North. So let's start there with the Detroit Lions and Dan Campbell and his decision. So I'm just curious. I mean, we know he's aggressive. We know he goes for it on fourth down. I think it was a third of the time during the year. He's, so he was, he was true to himself with some of those decisions. Were you good with those, or did you think maybe a more conservative approach would have made more sense?
You're always going to second guess everything in the moment where it's like, oh, you could regain the 17-point lead if you kick a field goal, or you could, tie the game up. And, it wasn't that he was just true to himself. I mean, this is a Detroit team that went for it on fourth down 34% of the time during the regular season. I didn't know this until I saw the stat this morning. That's the highest rate this century. So if you're going to be true to yourself and double down, you're going to do it in the NFC Championship game and not change your identity. But, as much as the analytics like slightly favored going for it versus kicking the field goal, I think there's a lot of layers and nuance here that we have to look at. They didn't lose this game entirely because of the two botched fourth down decisions. Let's not forget that Jahmyr Gibbs fumbled, sure. And then, a couple plays later that leads to a Christian McCaffrey touchdown. And then, Kindle Vildor, God bless him. I'm sure there are some Bears fans watching that being like, wait, like I know that guy. He was on the Bears for a little bit. And, the ball bonking off his head and just like, sometimes it just pays to be lucky. Like that's not a play that I think you can simulate all that much in practice. Of course, they'll do tip drills and stuff like that, but usually not, bouncing off someone's face mask into the hands of somebody for a 51-yard catch. But, I think where you look at what like the fourth down decisions and really like the body of work of Dan Campbell, I'm not going to say he went full tilt here the way that he did against the Dallas Cowboys in that game where we remember, is he ineligible? Is he not eligible? Like all of those things that happened on the 2-point conversion and they continued to go for it there. That to me was the product of emotion versus identity. And their identity was to go for it on fourth down in those situations where they're inside their opponent's 30-yard line. Like that had worked for them. The offense was humming in the first half. So why wouldn't they think that they could, pick up the fourth down conversion 2 times? And when they end up getting stopped at the 28-yard line that first time on fourth down, it's like, okay, is this like the sign of things to come, or was this just, an anomaly? And of course it ends up being a snowball effect. But I say all that to say I really have no issue with the fourth down decisions. I think that the context of analytics here, there's a lot that needs to be discussed that isn't just, like they went with the numbers. Like this was a game of feel. This was a game of knowing that your opponent is playing at home, that your opponent by and large has a more talented roster, and that if you gave them a crack to slip through, this game could change very quickly. And ultimately that's what happened. But I appreciated Dan Campbell after the game talking about how tough it is going to be for the Lions to get back here. I think that that's something so few coaches are willing to admit, and to admit it in that moment right there shows you he's a realist, but he's also been here as a player too. Remember, he played for that Giants team that I believe went to the Super Bowl, but obviously didn't win. It's really difficult to get back to the NFC Championship. And, for a Lions team that exceeded expectations in 2023, I think it truly will be difficult when the rest of the division is going to be better, in a better state in 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of the division being better and all, I heard you last week with Jonathan Hood and hosting on ESPN, and you were talking about Detroit and getting, and you wanted the Bears to see what it looked like and what, they could learn from seeing Detroit, and you guys were almost hoping they'd make the Super Bowl. So, you could really stretch it out there for Ryan Poles in Chicago. And I completely understand where you're coming from. So when I look at this and I look at Detroit making the playoffs and making the NFC Championship game, and Green Bay winning in the playoffs and established with Jordan Love, to me, it looks to me, if I'm Ryan Poles, that I am seeing a division on the up, and that it's not only that I need to keep coming up with them because the Bears are behind them right now. You have to come up and pass them. And to do that, and we'll get into the ins and outs of what this means. To do that, I think you need to stay aggressive. I think you need to make sure that you are trying to fill all the holes, not getting complacent, and constantly trying to strive forward. And I don't know if maybe that's also what you were getting at. So what can the Bears, in essence, learn from the Packers and the Lions after this postseason?
The simplest way to put it is that if you can master the quarterback position, if you can just get that part right, it makes everything a lot easier. And that word easy is obviously simplifying things. You can, building good teams takes time. And I think the Lions are the masterclass, certainly, on how to do that with an offensive line. But take a look at every draft class that they've had since Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes linked up in 2021. They're getting major and immediate contributions from a lot of those draft picks, from Penei Sewell all the way up to Jahmyr Gibbs this year. There's some really, really good players and really good strategy that the Bears, I think, can copy from the Detroit Lions and the way that they've done things. And of course, what you saw with Jared Goff going from the Rams to the Lions, it did take time for this offense to look the way it did in the first half of this NFC Championship game. I guess we can, they're going to want to throw away the tape from the second half regardless. But that was a really, my God, some of those throws that he made to Amon-Ra St. Brown, just putting it in the only place that his receiver could get, that's really impressive. And that's good quarterback play. Same thing with Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers. The Bears have to get that part right before they can do anything else. How many times have we seen the Bears try to build really, really good teams on defense first and foremost, because that was, that has been their identity for their existence, but also, making the investments elsewhere, expensive offensive linemen, having a solid run game, but then they can't get the quarterback spot right. You go to that 2018 team, the amount of resources that they threw into the defense and for the quarterback position with Mitchell Trubisky to effectively be their Achilles heel, they don't want to do that again. So I think that the model around the league is that you saw, or at least in the NFC North, but truly around the NFL too, if you can just get that quarterback position right, no matter what it takes to get there, if you believe that's Justin Fields or if you believe that that's Caleb Williams, Drake May, somebody in the draft, that has to be priority number one, first and foremost here this offseason. They cannot afford to get that part wrong if they want to stay competitive and with the rest of the teams in the NFC North and ultimately surpass the other teams to go and win a division title.
Absolutely. And speaking of a team that got the quarterback position right, the Kansas City Chiefs, because, and I understand this wasn't a Patrick Mahomes, throwing for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns kind of game, but a lot of big throws, and it was only 17-10. But the bottom line here is, and you can say it was that Lamar struggled and the Chiefs defense played great, and that's all true. But the bottom line is, when you have a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, he has been to, he continues to go to Super Bowls, 4 straight, AFC Championship games. He's only lost 3 playoff games, and those were 2 to Tom Brady and 1 to Joe Burrow. He's at that level. And like you said, if you get the quarterback position right, you can compete for years and years. If you get the quarterback position that right, this is the I know it's Travis Kelce, but these are the worst weapons he's ever had to deal with. He basically had his worst season of his career, and he's still in the Super Bowl, and the Kansas City Chiefs are knocking on another title.
And when you think about what's the turnaround for the Kansas City Chiefs? First off, their defense carried them through the season, so they could be mediocre in moments on offense. So they could lose to the Denver Broncos, lose to the Las Vegas Raiders because of turnovers, and still be a 10-7 team. now playing for a Super Bowl. Like, who would have thought? Well, okay, well, if you have 15 on your roster, you're going to be able to do that. But if you have a defense that is that multiple, that aggressive, they're not hunting for the big play the way that they did the last time this Super Bowl matchup between the Chiefs and the 49ers played out during the 2019 season. They're not just predicated on turnovers. They're very multiple, and their personnel reflects that too. So that allows the offense to go through its lumps and then all of a sudden seem like it's finally turning the course at like the most pivotal point of the season. But, when I think of turnovers and I think of what we saw from Patrick Mahomes here in the postseason, of course, like his own improved play, and I say improved kind of, there's nuance to that, like 0 turnover worthy plays, 0 turnovers, period, 2 sacks and 38 dropbacks in the postseason. You're watching a quarterback do the most important thing in football at the most important time, which is taking care of the football. And I mean, his ability to scramble, the expected points added per drop back on those, or per scramble in those moments in the postseason, like those would have been ranked towards the top of the NFL among quarterbacks if those happened during the regular season. So I'm sure it's very frustrating for fans around the league where it's like, man, why can't my quarterback come on at the penultimate moment of the season and make it look as easy as Patrick Mahomes did? Like, that's what separates him at 28 years old, just now entering his prime as an athlete, from others in the league. And I think the one thing about Lamar Jackson and in that game, I don't like how people are bringing up the idea of, well, that's the type of quarterback you can't win with, and meaning that like Justin Fields won't, because they do have similar skill sets, like on paper. I want to make sure that I make that part clear, but it's definitely, you can win with Lamar Jackson, but he in his own right can blame himself for being a big play hunter and for putting, the Ravens in these moments where they've come up short. It's not the skill set itself. Like, I want to make that clear that I just don't like the narrative that's out there that, a quote unquote running quarterback, you can't succeed with him, because you can, because he's done it during the regular season. He is, he's going to win the MVP here in a week. It's just frustrating that, for him, he's come up short in 4 of these playoff losses for the Ravens.
Yeah, there's no shame in losing to Patrick Mahomes. So let's move over to the Chicago Bears. Let's start on the coaching side of the ball here. Coaching side of the ball, the coaching staff. And let's start with Matt Eberflus, and we'll get into the coordinator hires he's made, both of which I like. So before we get into the coordinators, I did want to ask you one. Obviously, after the season, Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren were very deliberate in deciding, everything with exit interviews and before moving forward and the postseason press conference and all. My question to you is, what do you think? Do you think Matt Eberflus's job was in jeopardy at all? I think a lot of people were confident that he was going to remain, but before that, he was going to remain, but then the Packers lost and maybe some things swung a little bit. So do you think there was an issue there, or do you think it was more of just kind of looking at how the Bears could improve?
Well, if you take a look at Ryan Poles, and if you take him at face value and like just, for what he has said every step along the way, he has never not doubled down his support for Matt Eberflus. I think he's been very measured in the way that he's talked about certain people within the organization, the quarterback being, the one he's been like most careful about. He's never been overly gushing or glowing in his praise or, I guess, critique of Justin Fields. But when it comes to Matt Eberflus, you go back to that press conference at the trade deadline when he's talking about, this is the person who I see come in here every single day. The results may not look like it on the field, but it's somebody who he trusts has a plan. And that has been something he talked about. Like, that was like week 9 all the way till the end of the season, till the time he doubled down ultimately and decided to move forward with Matt Eberflus. Like, that is really, like, I think you could see that the signs were there more than just like the outside perception that Matt Eberflus was not going to be coming back after a 10-win season 10 wins in 2 years. So, people are wondering, why did it take so long? They're 2 days after the season ended, or 3 days after the season ended, they made the call to fire, 5 members of the offensive staff and maintain Matt Eberflus going into 2024. I think that there were conversations we heard from Eberflus, like, going after that Green Bay game, he said he didn't have a schedule for the week. He thought it was going to be midweek, which, was Wednesday, more or less. And I think, when you just have to connect the dots here, like that's the most important thing that you can do with the people who are in charge of this organization and making the decisions. When Kevin Warren talks about taking a big picture look and wanting to, stay the course, following the path that he had at the Rams, more than 2 decades ago, that this was going to be a team that he wanted to see through and see, get to the other side of things. Then there's a lot of parallels with the Bears, that you're not going to just pull the plug on this thing after 2 seasons and expect to start over, even though if you're looking at it from an outsider's perspective and not, taking into effect all of the things, Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles were the first boots on the ground in Chicago at the start of this rebuild. There's a lot of time that they spent together building this plan. It's not as easy just to be like, okay, well, thanks for your service. I'm moving on with my plan. After 2 years, you're out of here. Like, there's a lot more that goes into that I think has to be talked about. And if they turn the corner here in year 3, then their plan will have worked. But obviously that puts the pressure not only on Matt Eberflus to win in 2024, but also on Ryan Poles to make sure that his plan, his draft strategy, his free agency strategy works in 2024. Otherwise, they could all be on the hot seat next year.
All right, so moving on from Matt Eberflus, and for those of you on YouTube, I don't know why I'm purple, but we're just going to roll with this anyway. Gotta love technology. The coordinator hires. Let's start with Shane Waldron. I thought once they made the decision to keep Matt Eberflus, to me, when Shane Waldron became available with the Pete Carroll decision, I thought it was the best possible hire they could make at offensive coordinator. I'm really thrilled with it. I'm thrilled with how he uses, personnel sets. I think he's got some creativity. I do like that, he does a lot of quick stuff and short stuff, but Shane Waldron does like to take deep shots and try and go for explosive plays. And I think the fact that he was there with Kirk Cousins in Washington, what he did with Geno Smith, some of the stuff he even did with Russell Wilson, cutting down his time to throw and reducing sacks and all. I think Shane, and also was there for Jared Goff and his renaissance after a rough start in LA. I think that was the best possible hire they could make as offensive coordinator.
They did their homework. You can really give the organization some credit. Like 9 interviews for an OC position. That's not for a head coach position. That's not for a general manager. Like I don't even think I can't think back to a time where you heard 9 candidates emerge for, one of the top positions in the organization. So kudos to their process, because that shows that they're doing a lot of work to try to make sure that they get it right this time. Of course, there's the track record that they have to correct from the last coaching staff, certainly the firings that happened during the season, whether it was Alan Williams to David Walker, for like the personal reasons, and then like the coaching on field stuff, with parting ways with Luke Getsy. They have to get this right, because they've got to make sure that whoever is playing quarterback for this organization next season is in the best possible position to succeed, because it just felt like Fields and Luke Getsy it was never a symbiotic relationship. Like they tried, there were moments where it's like, okay, play calling's taking a step in the right direction. Quarterback play might be catching up with that. Then quarterback play would surpass play calling. It never felt like there was equal footing from either side. So when you take a look at the amount of candidates, but also like the coaching trees that most of these candidates are from, I don't think it's by mistake that there were 4 guys, including Shane Waldron, that had coached under Sean McVay, that there are 5 candidates who are part of that Shanahan, McVay, Kubiak, system. And that's the system that you see most effective in the NFL today. Everybody from Jared Goff to Brock Purdy seems to be in it, unless you have one of the very rare scheme transcendent quarterbacks like a Patrick Mahomes. And that's good for the future of this organization, because it doesn't necessarily rely upon them getting it right in one. I mean, obviously they have to get the quarterback spot right, but they don't need to know right now what they're going to do necessarily. Of course, you might, if you're in the front office, in the coaching staff, you're going to have an idea of the direction you want to go in. But let's say they hired a coordinator who's like, I've got a great plan for Justin Fields. Just let's stick with him. This is going to be the way that the team runs it back in 2024. And then come March 25th, they get an offer that they can't refuse with Justin Fields. And then they trade Justin Fields, and then this coordinator with the new quarterback that would be coming via the draft doesn't have as good of a plan. You can't hire somebody like that. So I think Shane Waldron's history with different quarterbacks, all the way from Jared Goff when he was the pass game coordinator and quarterbacks coach in LA to, the 1 year with Russell Wilson and the Geno Smith renaissance, like those are all encouraging signs for the Bears that they picked the right guy this time around to get the most out of whoever is playing the position, because working with different skill sets, I think, of course, it's going to, maximize the capabilities of this offense and make sure that you're getting the most out of somebody who, if it is Justin Fields, it's not like he's having to learn an entire new offense. There will be similar concepts because of the West Coast principles and everything that would be somewhat of a carryover from the offshoot that he was in last year, which was an offshoot of that Shanahan offense, because Matt LaFleur had coached under Luke Getsy for all those years.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving over to the defensive side of the ball, obviously not as splashy of a hire. When I think most people expected that. I know some people were saying, "Oh, Ron Rivera or Vic Fangio, bring him back," kind of thing. But I mean, I think this is Matt Eberflus's defense, and the defensive coordinator was going to be, if it wasn't going to be an internal promotion, it was going to be someone like this, a defensive line coach, a defensive backs coach, someone like that getting an opportunity or, a return chance at defensive coordinator. So, I mean, I'll be perfectly honest, I don't know a ton about Washington. I did text, I had Ron Rivera on my podcast last week. I texted with him and said, "What do you think?" And he's just like, "Oh, he's great. You'll love him." Didn't give me a lot of details beyond that. But, what do you know about him and what do you think he can bring to this defense?
Yeah, I mean, he's a defensive line specialist. So, that was, one of his first roles in the NFL in Chicago after he was, just a defensive assistant in 2008. He's part of the Lovey tree. He coached under Rivera for, I believe it was 9 seasons in Carolina. And, up front is where his expertise lies. Now, as a defensive coordinator who is not going to be calling plays, we still expect Matt Eberflus to do that. Where does this team need to improve most? It needs to improve its pass rush. So great that you have a defensive coordinator who, has his bread and butter in coaching the guys up front, in coaching guys to get after the quarterback so this team can take the next step, whether, that's leaning on him. Who do you like in the draft? Who do you like in free agency to be playing opposite Montez Sweat? And also helping Matt Eberflus with the game plan to become even more multiple and more aggressive up front in the pressures that they do dial up. That's one thing we saw change a lot when Eberflus took over from week 2 onward. It took time. It took a change in personnel. It took a change in roles, but they definitely got to become a more aggressive defense up front instead of the passive approach that was kind of an antiquated one where you were only expecting to get pressure with your 4 down linemen. That's the way it was under Alan Williams, and that's okay. It's just that's not today's NFL. It just can't be. So, I think with Eric Washington and what you've seen with the personnel that Buffalo had, I believe they were number 4 scoring defense this year, and he's had successful pass rushes that have been under his guidance. That's the number one thing, I think, when you take a look at this for somebody who's trying to figure out what is Eric Washington going to bring to the Chicago Bears. That's going to be the priority, because when that gets honed even further, that helps the guys in the back end more. It's going to create more opportunities for turnovers, for interceptions, to, allow the young corners to continue to develop once Terrell Smith and Tyreek Stevenson get into year 2, when Kyler Gordon gets into year 3, Jaquan Brisker in year 3. And then, of course, we'll see what they do with Jalen Johnson. But I think it's a solid hire. I think you're also limited, too, when you are bringing somebody in. This is multifaceted. When you're I remember going back to when they hired Phil Snow from Carolina, or he, formerly of Carolina. He wasn't anywhere at the time they hired him to be a senior defensive assistant. There weren't a whole ton of names out there. And I remember pondering about, what about Leslie Frazier? I think Leslie Frazier wants to still be a head coach. You're not going to you're not going to get the head coach of a team that hasn't won a lot of games to sign off on somebody who, if things don't go the right way, if the Bears say, well, we're going to move on in a different direction, you have your natural replacement. That's the problem with a lot of teams. It's the reason that, on top of a number of different reasons, finances being one of them, that the Los Angeles Chargers didn't pull the plug on Brandon Staley far sooner than that horribly embarrassing loss to the Las Vegas Raiders. There was no natural replacement on staff for an interim more than just a couple of weeks than the direction in which they went. If you have that person on staff, that in a lot of ways is a big threat to somebody who is in a head coaching position in 2024 where it's got to win a significant number of games. You don't want your head coach is not going to want to be coaching over his shoulder or looking over his shoulder at somebody who very well may be in that position of wanting another head coaching opportunity like Leslie. Certainly he was with the Minnesota Vikings. He was with Buffalo. He took a year off. We'll see where he lands. But I think that was, at that time when the senior defensive analyst came in to help Eberflus once Alan Williams left, the options there were limited. And when it comes to a defensive coordinator, the options will naturally be limited when the head coach is calling defensive plays. The same thing as I think it would be if the shoe was on the other foot and Eberflus was an offensive-minded head coach who was calling offensive plays.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about job stability for Matt Eberflus and for Ryan Poles, even for that matter. And you brought it up even earlier when we were talking about Matt Eberflus. That brings me to my next point, and that is, Brad Biggs reported towards the end of the season that Matt Eberflus had a 4-year contract, not a 5-year contract. And if that is indeed accurate, if the Bears decide to go with a rookie quarterback, if that's the decision they make, what Caleb Williams, Drake May, doesn't matter, whatever rookie quarterback it might be, to me, I think it would be smart for the Bears to give Matt Eberflus a 1-year extension right now. One, it would stabilize with Shane Waldron and stabilize the coaching staff. And two, if they don't do that and bring in a rookie quarterback, you are potentially doing the exact same thing you did in 2021 with Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace in a win-now situation with a rookie quarterback. And I think it would be a lot smarter to let Matt Eberflus know. And I understand Ryan Poles wants to win next year. Bears fans want to win next year. But if they go 8-9 with a rookie quarterback, and it just feels to me that they should have a little more stability for the next year or two if they make a change of quarterback.
Yeah, that was my biggest concern during the days after the Green Bay loss, like how they were going to approach this if they brought Matt Eberflus back. And I know that this received some pushback from Bears fans, but this is perpetuating the cycle if they don't give Matt Eberflus a contract extension. Because let's say, going into year 3, it is a must-win situation. Does it mean that you have to, win the Super Bowl? No one's saying that. But that's, 3 years into this thing with the amount of resources that they've poured into it and will have poured into it by the time next season rolls around, when there was as many free agent head coaches available that they could have gone with, that they opted to stick with Matt Eberflus, that puts pressure on any staff to win. And you can go back to John Fox and Mitchell Trubisky. You don't want to perpetuate that cycle where you pair lame duck head coach with a rookie quarterback, and then that rookie quarterback becomes older and he gets passed off to a new staff and is learning a new system and is not necessarily the guy by the current staff that's in place. Don't set yourself up for failure if you're the Chicago Bears by doing that. And that's why I asked Kevin Warren specifically. I understand that was putting him on the spot, but it was a question that had to be asked in his season-ending press conference, the talk of contract extensions. And when you think of the timeline of successful organizations and giving, syncing everybody up, that's like the very baseline for success, to make sure that somebody isn't feeling that they're coaching for their job when you have a rookie quarterback who may, if you do have a rookie quarterback, may need time to develop. And then let's say they do draft Caleb Williams and Eberflus gets fired after 1 year, then the whole staff's probably gone. That's how it works, people. And then what? Caleb Williams is in the same situation that Justin Fields was in after a year when Matt Nagy was fired along with the entire staff, and having to learn a new system. You can rid yourself of a lot of pain if you're the Bears by just doing things in, sequential order that they just have not been able. You can break the cycle. Doesn't mean that you have to fire the entire coaching staff heading into this season. You can keep Matt Eberflus. You can get a new offensive staff. You can get a new quarterback. You can stay with Justin Fields, whatever the hell it is. but just go ahead and line everybody up so they're all on the same timeline, because that alleviates a lot of the politics, that alleviates a lot of the pressure when there is inevitably going to be pressure for this team to be better than 7-10 next season because of the talent of this defense, because of the pieces that they will be able to add during free agency in the draft, and potentially bringing in a young quarterback to a team that is far better than the record of a team that typically has the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's get to that while we wrap up this interview with Courtney Cronin, and that is that number 1 pick and what they're going to potentially do. And the one thing that I've been, I guess, fighting with a lot of people on Bears Twitter about is the idea of the trade down. And I haven't hit anything for a while. I believe the smartest thing for them to do would be to draft Caleb Williams and trade Justin Fields. I think that's the smartest thing for the franchise moving forward. But if they were going to entertain trading down, the most popular opinion that I find amongst Bears fans is the idea of trading down for the haul and drafting Marvin Harrison. And a lot of people are basing that. When I argue with them, I get screenshots from the Courtney Cronin, Jeremy Fowler article about the potential compensation that they could get in a trade down. And I don't remember the exact quote, but you guys talked about how you could get potentially a Carolina Panthers type trade down, even for a team that's maybe in the top 5. And I think a lot of fans are using that as you could trade down, get the exact same kind of big trade you got last year, and get Marvin Harrison. And to me, I look at that and go, I don't think Marvin Harrison's getting past 4 with the Arizona Cardinals. I think that'd be a lock if he's there, that they would take that pick, which means if you'd like to trade down and draft Marvin Harrison, you've got 2 options with Washington and New England, and that's it. And of course, you need 2 to tango. They may not even want to trade up. They may want to stay put. But regardless of that, do you think it is possible to get a massive overpay? And if you look at the charts, you're looking at, if you trade down to 3, it should be basically a 2nd round pick this year and next year kind of thing. From 1 to 3 is about all that the team should have to give up. Is the Caleb Williams tax, so to speak, do you think it's possible to get a massive haul like they did with the Carolina Panthers and still be in range to get Marvin Harrison Jr.?
It should, to the first part of it, it should be bigger than what they got for Carolina last year. Now, what does bigger mean? I mean, DJ Moore is the equivalent, let's say, of a 1st round pick. I don't think anybody's going to question that. So, are you getting another player in the trade? A lot of teams that's an easy way to upgrade your roster immediately. I know that Ryan Poles is a build your team through the draft guy, but he's also been aggressive at adding from veteran players when he can. So taking a look at what that package could be, there's not just Washington and New England that need a quarterback. Atlanta needs a quarterback. And of course, people have thrown out the idea that, maybe Justin Fields would like to go down there. And, I've heard rumors that Raheem Morris is infatuated with him and his skill set. Would they want to give up the 8th overall pick for Justin Fields? That seems like a little bit of a stretch. The natural, when you take a look at history, I mean, the Josh Rosen trade in 2019 after 1 season, nobody knew what he was. Obviously, bad situation in Arizona led to, him being on the move to Miami, and his career never panned out. But that was for a 2nd and a 5th round pick. Justin Fields has 38 career starts. He showed significant improvement towards the end of last season. 2nd and a 5th round pick should be baseline. And I think what Jeremy and I got out of polling people that we talked to around the league is that there really is no true consensus. At least there wasn't nearing the end of December, towards the beginning of the offseason. It wasn't, oh man, Justin Fields, 2nd round pick, lock it up. That's nothing lower. Anything from a 2nd to a 3rd, and what the packages would be. I know that we have an assignment we went through the simulated exercise for a story that I think we're running this week at ESPN.com. And, one of the offers that came in to me, playing the role of, GM, was a 2nd and a 7th from the Raiders. And I feel obviously this would be not having Luke Getsy as their offensive coordinator. That was not part of the strategy of this exercise. But if you're Ryan Poles and you get a 2nd and a 7th, I don't know if that's something that you can necessarily just hang the phone up on. A 2nd round pick, you don't have a 2nd round pick right now because you traded it away to go get Montez Sweat. Recouping draft capital, starting the clock over on a young rookie quarterback who's coming into a good team, not a bad team, because that first round pick is not theirs via their own record. Like, those are tough decisions, but I think like the necessary decision. And to answer your second part of your question on Marvin Harrison, every mock you see right now has him gone by 4 to Arizona. He should be like the first non-quarterback off the board.
Right.
If it does, I know we always see like 1, 2, and 3 go, and I think we even saw that like within the last couple of years that we expected 3 quarterbacks gone in the top 4. This past year, and like sometimes those things pan out. Sometimes you end up seeing quarterbacks fall further. This group has about 6 that could be gone by the beginning to like the middle of day 2, or not middle, like the middle of the second round in day 2. But I think that Marvin Harrison is long gone in a situation where the Bears end up trading back from 1, because I can't really see them trading back when they're like, I mean, if New England wants to move up, but those teams have to know that the Bears are serious about taking a quarterback. And if they really want Caleb Williams, or if they really want Drake May, and we'll see, how the order changes from pro days and all the information we glean from the combine, then they've got to be willing to pony up. And I think a more likely scenario for the Bears is that it's a Rome Odunze, somebody like before the top 10's over. And of course, like they need an edge rusher. I don't think this edge class is great outside of, like the first round. Maybe they address that in free agency because there are some bigger names that are going to be available. But I don't know if a trade back scenario from 1, if they're not drafting Caleb Williams, would get them in the right position, unless it's like 2 or 3, and then they would take Marvin Harrison Jr. with like the 2nd or 3rd pick.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think if Poles decides to trade down, it's going to be further down, maybe Atlanta at number 8, something like that, Las Vegas, like one of those type of teams where you're trading down far enough to get that, the multiple first round picks and future, and set you up like he was able to do with Carolina. So absolutely. So there she is, Courtney R. Cronin on Twitter. I'm sure you're all following her already. She does a phenomenal job covering the Bears all season long. And of course, you catch her all over ESPN, television, radio. She's everywhere. So Courtney, thanks so much. I know you're busy. I appreciate you squeezing me in, and best of luck in covering this off season. I'm sure it'll be interesting.
It most definitely will be. I'm excited to see kind of what comes out of Senior Bowl this week. I think that should start kind of kicking things into high gear, even though the big name quarterbacks that Bears fans are expecting to be in play for won't be down there. But still, there's a lot of talent. And as they say, the draft starts in Mobile. So exciting times.
Absolutely.